Question 60 says that ray PK bisects angle LPM. The measure of angle LPM is 11x degrees, and the measure of angle LPK is 4x plus 18 degrees. What is the measure of angle KPM? And as answers, we have angle measurements ranging from 12 degrees all the way to 66 degrees. As far as the ACT math concepts in the question itself, we're obviously dealing with a bunch of angles, as well as the word bisect, and we have this ray. And before we solve this question, I'm just going to define what these two words are, the ray and the bisect, because it's going to be helpful to know their definitions here. So ray is just a line that starts at a given point and goes off forever in some direction. And then bisect just means to divide into two equal parts. All right, so now let's solve this question. And what I would begin doing here is just drawing a picture, since they definitely have not given us a picture on purpose as usual. And we're told that ray PK bisects angle LPM. So I'm going to draw that angle LPM like this. This is going to be L, this is P, and this is M. And our ray PK is bisecting that, so we know that that means to cut it into two equal parts. The P, this endpoint of the ray, is going to start here, and I'll just draw it approximately cutting this into two pieces. The K is going to be the end of that ray. And we're told that the measure of LPM is 11x. We can go ahead and label this LPM as 11x, like that. We're also told that the measure of angle LPK is 4x plus 18. So LPK is this part right here. We'll go ahead and label that as 4x plus 18. And actually at this point, they don't tell us this explicitly, but we know that LPK, that angle, is going to be the exact same measure as the angle KPM, since PK bisected this bigger angle into two equal parts. So even though they haven't said that this is 4x plus 18 as well, we can go ahead and fill that in. And that's a good practice to do on any ACT math question. As soon as we realize that we can fill something in, write something down, it's good to just put it down there in front of us. Okay, and then finally, what they're asking is, what is the measure of angle KPM? So essentially what we're trying to find here is the value of this angle, which we know is the same as this expression, 4x plus 18. Now the issue is that the only thing we have about this angle is this expression. We don't have an actual degree measurement, which is what we need as far as the answer choices go. What we could realize, though, is that if we can figure out what x is, then we can plug it into this expression, and then we'll basically be done. We'll have an angle for a KPM. So now the question becomes, how do we figure out what x is, given the information that we have in front of us? Well, if we want to figure out what x is, then it would be helpful if we can come up with an equation of some sort that we can then solve for x. And what we might notice at this point is that we have this 4x plus 18 for this angle, we have this 4x plus 18 for that angle, and then we have this 11x for this larger angle. And we can realize that this 4x plus 18 plus this 4x plus 18 is going to add up to the 11x. And that realization allows us to set up an equation. So let's go ahead and write that equation out. 4x plus 18 plus 4x plus 18 is equal to 11x. And now we can go ahead and combine like terms here and solve this equation for x. So 4x plus 4x is 8x, and then 18 plus 18 is 36, and then we have 11x on the other side. And then subtracting 8x on both sides, we get that 36 is equal to 3x. Dividing both sides by 3, we get that 12 is equal to x. And this is exactly what we wanted. We can now plug in x equals 12 back into that expression, 4x plus 18, to figure out the measure of angle KPM. So 4 times 12 plus 18, 4 times 12 is going to be 48, and then plus 18, so we have 48 plus 18, that is going to be equal to 66. And so our answer here is going to be K. Let's look at a couple of the wrong answers now. Answer choice F of 12 degrees is especially tricky because it reflects the value of x that we solved for earlier on before we actually plugged it back into the expression to get the measurement of the angle. And it's a really classic sort of ACT trap answer where they'll include a number that's one of the steps in solving for the final answer, in case we forget what the question's asking and just instinctively go for what we've always been conditioned to solve for, which in this case is x. And answer choice G of 28 and 2/7 could reflect a mistake in the initial equation setup. So if instead of doing 4x plus 18 plus 4x plus 18 equals 11x, we had just set one of these equal to 11x and had written 4x plus 18 is equal to 11x. If we had went ahead and solved that for x and plugged it back into the 4x plus 18, that would lead to answer choice G. And then as far as H and J, not sure what those were anticipating. All right, and then at the bottom here, I'm going to write out what we ultimately needed to know mathematically on this question. Ultimately needed to know, basically it came down to understanding the definition of bisect and how to solve an algebraic equation. Finally, in terms of ultimate takeaways here, this is another good example of a question where just drawing a picture helps a lot, and where they have, on purpose, it looks like, not given us a picture. And also a question where it's helpful just to take things one step at a time and to label everything that we can as we read that information, as well as any information, as we saw earlier, that's not explicitly given, but that we can immediately fill in based on the definitions of the words here. And once we had all that information down, just sort of asking ourselves, how do we use this information in front of us and somehow connect it to what the answers are after? And we saw from doing that, we just set up an equation and it was pretty straightforward from there. And then the last big thing to notice about this is just the inclusion of answer choice F, which, as I mentioned earlier, is pretty typical of the ACT. And it's always interesting to think about why the ACT includes that type of answer, because someone who goes with 12 essentially did all the math correctly. They drew the picture, they drew the ray, they set up their equation up correctly, they found x. They just forgot what the question was asking, so they literally got 0 points for the whole question. So it's again a reminder that we constantly need to be aware of what the questions are asking us for, and aware that the ACT is ultimately largely about the small details. All right, and that wraps things up for question 60, which is the last question from this test.